Well, I would like to thank also once again the organizers for having us here, and also Jeremias for organizing this very interesting and challenging project. And thank you all for surviving this session after lunch. So I'm going to go on talking about equality, but this time in a bit from a more general way. So what I try to do in this paper is to look or to think about how EU equality law could evolve in the future, what could be its desirable evolution if we want, in terms both of at substantive level and enforcement level. So of course there can be many different proposals of how EU equality law could evolve. But for reasons of space, I decided to focus here on four main proposals which deal mainly with two different issues. One is how to improve coherence within EU equality law, and the other one is how to improve enforcement. So I will start with a brief overview of how EU equality law has evolved, just very briefly to put things in context. And then I will also briefly speak about why I'm looking at coherence and why I'm looking at how equality law could be better enforced. And then I will briefly mention the four proposals I'm talking about in my paper, but because we have limited time, obviously, I will just focus here in my presentation on two of them. One is about protecting better discrimination against gender reassignment, and the other one concerns reasonable accommodation beyond disability, and this connects with Judith's presentation that we had this morning. And I will finish with some concluding remarks. So in terms of the evolution of the equality law, and this will be a very brief summary, so perhaps I oversimplify, but it's just to provide, as I said, a bit of context. So equal treatment at EU level, as you may know, of course, started more as a market right, basically through Article 119 in the EEC Treaty, which established that men and women should be entitled to equal pay as a means to avoid unfair competition between companies established in different member states, which could potentially have different equal pay laws or not have equal pay laws at all. Later on, rather around the 1970s, it started to evolve more to become, in a way, a social right when the EU realized that it had to have, in a way, a human face and be better connected to its citizens. And for instance, it's in this period when Directive 76/207 was adopted to protect equal treatment more generally between men